MMA show around the world. My name's Mighty. Thank you so much for joining me. We have so much to talk about. We have belts on the line this week. We'll just put that over there for now. But we have so much. Let's start off. Let's recap real quick. UFC Tampa. Poor Rashad. Inactivity, I think, could be a big, knife in your side. And it's not just when you're off, but when you're trying to recover from an injury, in this case. And then he didn't even get like a tune-up fight. He's right in the mix, fighting a top 5 guy. I think Teixeira was ranked number 4, if I remember correctly. And I'm sad to say that it kind of ended like I thought it would. Teixeira gets the first round knockout. Rashad got hurt pretty bad. He didn't even know what happened. So if you missed it, that was UFC on Fox this past weekend. Free fights are always good. All right, let's just get into it. What everyone's talking about, Conor McGregor breaks the internet. Wow. So it started off a couple days ago with a cryptic tweet about him saying, "I'm going to retire young. Thanks for the cheese. Catch yous later." Something of that nature. And then everyone freaks out. Typical, right? The trolls are out. Well, everyone thought he was trolling, actually, and apparently he wasn't. Dana White goes on The Herd on Fox Sports 1, kind of addresses the situation of what's going on. And I get both sides. Dana basically stating that he has media obligations, which I get, right? You are employed by a business, which is the UFC, and there are obligations to do besides just getting in the cage and fighting. But Conor, he just wants to fight, right? He just wants to fight, so he's training in Iceland, which is probably not quite halfway around the world from where he needs to be, but pretty close to halfway. And they want him to come out to do media obligations, shoot a commercial. Vegas, Stockton, New York. It makes sense. It's part of the job. So, basically, Dana pulls him from UFC 200 because he will not fulfill his media obligations. I get it. I get both sides of it, right? I mean, if you're a fighter, you're in camp. Especially, he is fighting an opponent he just lost to, his first and only loss in the UFC, right? And Nate is legit. You don't want to take him lightly. You can't go back in there with the same game plan or the same result's going to happen, potentially, right? So it's tough. It really sucks. Conor did, however, make a statement this morning, just about an hour ago, because this is Thursday morning, and he made a long statement, which I won't get into the whole thing, but basically saying that he wanted a little bit of leeway. He was willing to go do the New York presser, but didn't want to do the rest of the tour. He's done tours his whole life, X amount of interviews, and blah, 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 and then go back to Iceland so he can focus on training. And for the record, he said he is not retired, so that was thankfully debunked. So now we know he's still there, and so that puts Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar fighting for the interim title still at UFC 200, opposed to a vacant title. We'll have to see how this unfolds. I don't think this is nearly the end of this, but I will say this stunt, if you want to call it a stunt, I really think Conor's speaking from the heart, especially what would happen with the fighter that died a couple weeks ago that he was in attendance at. I'm sure that has to play a toll on your psyche, regardless if it was a teammate, a brother, whatever. It's tough, right? And everyone handles death differently, and he saw the fight, and then that fighter dies after he gets taken to the hospital, I mean, that's not going to be something easy to deal with, I would think. I couldn't deal with it very easily because death hurts me bad. So this stunt is worth 10 times its weight in gold for any promotion that the UFC can do for this fight, because now it's a storm. It's on, it's just crazy. Social media is going crazy. So, I don't know if you could say that's a bright side, but it's a definite positive to even generate more pay-per-view dollars. Because now it's either you hate Conor McGregor even more because he's pulling some BS, or you're like, no, don't leave, please come back. And then so he, we'll have to see. It's the Floyd Mayweather effect, as we'd like to say in the boxing world. So, in any case, we'll have to stay tuned and see what happens. I'm sure there might be another statement today before this video is even out, since Conor stated that he is not retired. We'll have to see what Uncle Dana has to say. We'll wait and see. All right, let's get into this weekend. It's actually a big weekend, like I was saying when I was throwing my belt across the studio. There's actually quite a few title fights. Let's start with Bellator 153. Friday night, Koreshkov against Bendo. That's Andre Koreshkov against Benson Henderson. And I'll tell you why this is an important fight. This will be Benson's first fight in Bellator, so that's a historical significance. But I think more importantly, if Bendo wins, he can be a triple crown. He was a WEC champion. He was a UFC champion. He could potentially become the Bellator champion tomorrow night. That's big. 3 big promotions, champion in all 3. Not to take Koreshkov lightly, but Bendo's been there. He's done that. He's faced the best. And honestly, Koreshkov, he typically wins by decision, and I don't think you're going to outpoint Bendo. If he's great at anything, it's outpointing people. He doesn't necessarily have a lot of finishes. He has some, don't get me wrong, but he's great at outpointing people. So if I would have to choose, I think Benson gets the nod by unanimous decision. But, Koreshkov, he's a good fighter, and I think he's one of the better fighters in Bellator. Every weight class of Bellator has some legit fighters, 2 or 3 in each weight class, and then the rest of them, I think, are more like up-and-comers, or maybe they've come over from another promotion towards the end of their career, whatnot like that. So, in any case, that's tomorrow night, free on Spike TV. It's going to be broadcast from the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. And then the following night, on Saturday, we have UFC 197, the long-awaited return of Jon Jones, Johnny Bones Jones. So he was supposed to originally fight Daniel Cormier for that long-awaited rematch, but unfortunately Cormier had an injury, had to pull out, and OSP says, pick me, and he comes in. And a lot of people goes, why didn't Rumble get that call? Well, Rumble did get the call, but he just had oral surgery not too long ago, and he can't even put a mouthpiece in yet. Otherwise, he would be potentially fighting this coming weekend against Johnny Bones Jones. And man, I know I want to see that fight. I still want to see that fight. I know Cormier beat Rumble, but I still want to see Rumble against Jon Jones. I think it's a good matchup. All right, there's a lot of great matchups on this fight card, although I'm just going to give my fight predictions on the main event and co-main event. But I did want to point out that both Pettis brothers are fighting on this card, and I found that interesting, maybe a little shocking, just because I remember Anthony talking previously that he didn't want to fight on the same fight card as his brother, because if he saw his brother lost, it would bring down his vibe, it would kill his buzz. So I was a little shocked to see that, but maybe he had a change of heart, maybe he talked to a little brother and they worked it out, I don't know. But they are both fighting on this card. But let's talk about the 2 main fights. Starting with the co-main event, we got Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson against Henry Cejudo, or Cejudo, depending on who's pronouncing it. I'll pronounce it both ways, so that way I know I at least have a 50% chance of getting it right. So, what I will say about Henry, I mean, obviously, phenomenal wrestling. He was an Olympian, so great wrestling base. But he is undefeated. But almost all of his fights, all of his wins are decisions, especially in the last couple years. His first few fights, he got a couple TKOs or KOs. But after those first few, the last 5 or 6, maybe last 7, they're all decisions. You're not going to beat Demetrius Johnson by decision. I'm sorry. Maybe you catch him with something, but decision? I don't see that happening. He's too fast. I will say with Demetrius Johnson, he actually has a good game. He is arguably one of the best fighters out there. And I think personally, and I know Joe Rogan has talked about this before, if he was in a higher weight class, if that dude was a middleweight or a light heavyweight, he would probably be one of the most popular fighters out there. The smaller weight guys, you know, the little dudes, they just don't get the respect. I don't know what it is. I like watching them fight. I think it's exciting, but I am a hardcore fight fan. I love watching fights. His game is solid. He has virtually no holes in his game. I mean, what does he have? Please comment. Let me know. What is the holes in his game? The only 2 losses he has is in a higher weight class. He has not lost in the flyweight division. So there's something to be said there. He's small. Flyweight division is his natural weight class to fight in. I doubt he cuts much weight at all. Fighting at bantamweight, he's fighting guys that probably cut from 150, maybe even 155, guys that are naturally bigger, where he probably barely walked around at bantamweight. So fighting at flyweight makes sense. He has 4 finishes in his last 6 fights. One of those 6 fights, the one that he didn't get a finish, is Jon Johnson. He has fought Jon Dodson twice, and I think Jon Dodson is actually almost as good. He's a little, just a tiny bit behind Demetrius. Now he's moved up to bantamweight, and I think that'll do him real well. He actually just beat Manny Gambarian on this past weekend at UFC Tampa. His speed is unreal. So to go up to bantamweight, he is by far going to have the fastest hands and movement than probably anyone else in the division. I really want to see him fight Dominic Cruz. I find that to be a very interesting matchup. Hopefully we can see that play out. Assuming Dominic beats Uriah Faber, but we'll get to that another time because that is coming up, I believe, in June, so shortly. Now, back to that fight. Demetrius Johnson, I don't know if he finishes Henry, but I definitely see him retaining the belt. It's hard to say. I know that Henry has a good base. I don't think he's going to stop him with a ground game, but I can see him catching him. He's fast enough to catch him and get a TKO. So I don't think it's going to be a submission. I would either go unanimous decision or possibly catch him and get a TKO, but I do definitely see Demetrius Johnson keeping that strap. All right, now let's talk about the main event. We got Johnny Bones Jones against OSP. Like I mentioned earlier, Daniel Cormier was supposed to be slotted for that fight to defend his title against Jon for the long-awaited rematch, I should say. But unfortunately, due to injury, he had to pull out. So OSP stands in for Cormier, and now it's an interim title at 205, which is the light heavyweight. I know a lot of people don't like interim titles. I don't really mind it so much. But, you know, whoever takes this and gets the W will get to fight Cormier and unify it. And I think that's, obviously, unless Cormier gets another injury, that will definitely be the next fight slated for Cormier. So, here's the thing with Johnny Bones Jones. Technically undefeated. I know he has that one scratch in the loss column, and that's because of a DQ against Matt Hamill years ago. But technically, no one has beat him. Gustafsson was probably the closest to do so. That was a great match. I'm still waiting to see that rematch. But he has been off for about a year, a little over a year, around that. But he's not coming off an injury. And I think that's the key here. Inactivity is brutal for a fighter to come back, but I think coming off an injury is what really makes it, whether it's devastating or not. He's not coming off an injury. He hasn't been fighting at game speed. But then again, not everybody is Jon Jones. You know, Jon Jones is arguably the best in the game. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. OSP, solid fighter. I mean, you can't say, anyone that hasn't fought Jon Jones, you can't say they haven't fought that talent because Jon Jones is on a different level, in my opinion. And I don't even like Jon Jones personally as a human being. I know that sounds a little raw, but basically, as a fighter, I respect him and he's great. His antics and his decision-making outside the cage, not so good. But in any case, I definitely have to go with Jon Jones on this. I think he comes in and he's going to want to make a statement. You might even see a first-round finish. I think he really wants to come out and just hush up all the doubters, all the haters, and then prove to the fans that love him that he's still Johnny Bones Jones. So I think he gets that interim strap, and then he goes against Cormier to unify it. And then we'll talk about that when that gets closer. So that's my pick. Johnny Bones Jones, Demetrius Johnson, and then Bendo the night before. We got some good fights this weekend, folks. I hope you enjoy them. Thank you so much for watching this. Like always, share, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, your pets, your dogs, Crystal. All right, have a great day. I'll catch you next week.